India is expected to be severely impacted by climate change. We have the melting of the glaciers in the Himalayas. We have the sea level rise, which impacts millions of people living at the coastline, which have to then eventually migrate inwards the country. We have more and more severe extreme weather events. We have a change in rainfall patterns, namely the monsoon. So we have all these big problems of this global phenomenon of climate change. But what are the local impacts? And if we know what the local impacts are, what can we do about it? So I would like to interview today Professor David Dror, world-renowned expert in microinsurance, who has been recently, for the last couple of years, also been working in climate change. So I would like to know how can we marry climate change, microinsurance, to find local solutions. Professor David Dror, good afternoon. How are you?
Hello, Dr. Jungle. Very well. Nice to see you.
So let me jump right into the topic. We are talking about climate change today. Not one day passes when I open my newspaper or I switch on the TV and I hear about different catastrophes. A hurricane somewhere in North America, a flood in Southeast Asia, a problem with a crop in Africa. So I sometimes wonder, is there too much hype about climate change? What do you think?
Maybe some people might say there is too little hype about climate change. But whether it is too much or too little, or in some places too much and in others too little, we are hitting right into one of the issues, fluctuations. What we really need is to smooth such fluctuations, whether they are around climate change or around other sources of risk. Smoothing exposure to a risk is what we're talking about. And climate change is a risk. How much of it happens, how soon it will happen, is a matter of a big debate. And there is a lot of knowledge that needs to be acquired to inform this debate. So there is also a lot of knowledge and data that is required to inform the modeling of risks, which means that we at the Microinsurance Academy, focusing on smoothing of risks that can be insured, are dealing also with climate change related issues because they represent risks which have varying frequency, which fluctuate in varying severity, and if we want to find a solution that makes sense to farmers, it has to be very reasonable, has to be data-based, and has to offer coherent value both to insured and to insurer. And climate change is definitely a huge topic because a lot needs to still be learned before we can simply resolve the issue by saying it exists or it doesn't exist. That level is not enough.
Dr. Dror, you mentioned farmers. I have been interviewing farmers through focus group discussions, household interviews in rural India, in different areas of rural India. For example, Maharashtra, a semi-arid area frequently struck by droughts. So when I conducted interviews, after they already faced a couple of years of droughts, people were saying, the farmers were saying, yes, climate change is happening, I can see it. In the past it used to be different. Similarly, we know that recently there was a typhoon in the Philippines. And the media again said, this is because of climate change. What do you think? Can we say this event, this drought, this typhoon is because of climate change?
So this is really a case, Dr. Jungle, of the situation is where you stand depends on where you sit. When we sit in a quiet meeting room to discuss climate change, we may have different positions than when we are a farmer in a hot field with a lot of dust because there has been no rain. The more people are exposed to a situation, the more they reflect that exposure. Our job is to neutralize this very subjective attitude towards climate change. I do not know whether one can directly tie each and every particular event to the notion of climate change. Maybe yes, maybe no. But I do think that we need an operational, functional definition of what we mean by climate change. To me, climate change means that a trend is discernible over a reasonably long period of time. If that trend creates certain climatic conditions, I would treat those as climate change. But for that we need data for 30, 40, 50, 60 or 100 years. So, is Maharashtra being is on a trend of becoming drier? The way to check that is check the data on precipitation in the last 30 to 50 to 100 years. The data can be acquired. It's not easy, but it's possible. For some data, pieces of data, it's going to be much more complicated. If we're looking at climatic data, some are available easily, some are available but not easily, and some are simply unavailable. When it comes to the effect, that's much more complicated. If we want to, for instance, check whether the effect is lower crop, or crop of lower quality, or crop that is more expensive to produce, we need data elements which are very much more complicated to obtain for 30 years. We don't have yield data for 30 years. If we get yield data for 5 years in many places, this is already very good. But this may not be enough to determine climate change trends. So I think that part of the debate on climatic aspects is we can get an answer to more easily. When it comes to modeling the risks of climate change related risks to agriculture, to livestock, to people, that is a little more complicated, and we are relatively at an early stage, and the solutions that we are seeing around today, notably index-based insurance and others, still may have to undergo a great deal of refinement and calibration before that we can consider that we have obtained a very good solution that is not only good for the ones who deliver the solution, but also good for farmers who are willing to take up, willing to live with this, and willing to resolve their problems effectively, equitably, and sustainably.
You and your team are doing research on climate change related topics, but there are also world-renowned institutes and universities who have been doing research on this for already 10, maybe 20 years. So how does that compare? How much can you contribute to that knowledge?
Very good question. Not only how much can we contribute, but what kind of contribution is definitely at the heart of what we need to ask all the time. Otherwise, why do it? There is one thing that is clear. Very few people are actually observing, analyzing, quantifying the problem from the point of view of the farmer, of the recipient of the solutions, of the segment of the population that is at the base of the pyramid, frequently illiterate, innumerate, without experience with insurance, and not very well endowed with all kinds of technological solutions to climate change or to many other issues of farming. These are the people on whom we depend for food security, for proving that a solution that sounds good in experimental environments is actually good on the ground. What we excel in, and I think where we complement many other research institutes, is that we are on the ground, that our focus is the farmer, the actual last mile. Nothing can work without the translation of knowledge into practical, concrete solutions at the last mile. And the toughest competition, the toughest exam, not competition, but exam, that we all have to succeed in is to deliver solutions to those people who are supposedly illiterate, innumerate, without voice in politics, without voice in those laboratories that conceive solutions. If they like the solutions we bring, we know we have succeeded. If they don't like, no matter how wonderful it looks on paper, reality is that they are the true test of everything. And this is where we focus.
Professor Dror, you're talking about the solutions. So may I ask you, you are the expert in microinsurance.
Thank you.
How do we link up now microinsurance with the problems of climate change?
I wish we would have an answer as simple and as short as your question. How do we link microinsurance with climate change? Simple question, short, clear. I wish we would be able to have an answer which is as short and as simple as that. We don't have that yet. This is exactly what we're looking for. We're looking to quantify those pieces of the paradigm that are quantifiable. If we don't have a good set of methods to quantify the risk, insurance cannot come in. We then need to be able to translate that quantification into essentially two streams of costs. One, that you can't expect farmers to bear because they're not responsible for climate change emissions, for carbon emissions, for all kinds of issues that have created climate change. And expecting farmers to bear the full cost of the global evolution in climate change is not only unfair, it's undoable, unfeasible. So there is a role for governments through various means to bear that share of the cost. But how much is that share of the cost? How much is the cost of climate change components in crop yield loss? It's an essential question for policymakers, which for the time being there is very little answer to. Particularly if you're not talking in generalities, if you're talking for a specific farmer in a specific village in a district of Bihar, maybe even a block within a district, maybe even a village within a block within a district, because the differences between one place and the other may be statistically significant and material very important. So that's one element. The other element is that when we detrend the cost of the risks, there still will be fluctuations. There always are. And we still want to smooth those fluctuations across good years and bad years, years with high intensity and low intensity, years with serious severity or lesser severity. And this kind of smoothing also commands a premium or a cost, which the farmers will have to bear. Now, bringing farmers to pay for premiums is a challenge which is not unique to climate change or to agri-risk, or every kind of risk. If you ask people to pay upfront for pooling of their risk with others, they have to trust that the pool is going to be around when it is time to pay. Not only when they are asked to contribute, but when it will be time for them to get compensation. If they don't trust the pool, you can expect to hear them say, which is very often true, I'm too poor to pay. And we cannot build solutions which would be sustainable and effective and equitable on I'm too poor to pay. No government can, no country has succeeded. So we need to devise not only the material solutions based on solid mathematics and solid quantification and solid data. We also need to be able to translate that into the kind of dialogue which is credible, which is believable, which is trustworthy amongst farmers in very concrete terms, so that they will say, this is what I would like to do, I am willing to participate, and this is the consensus that we adopt in our village. Creating consensus around the solutions requires going beyond just the scientific. And I think that on that particular aspect, No research lab can compete with us. We are way ahead of the research labs in actually facing up to farmers and bringing them to own both the issue and the solution. To just claim I have a problem and somebody else should pay is not a solution. To bring people to understand that with their own means, collectively, they can resolve certain issues, that is a huge step. That is in fact creating a market where there is none. We are not the market makers. We, MIA, do not underwrite risk. We do not sell anything. We do not take any money. So what we are doing is we are the catalyst for change, social change. But this catalyst needs to be able to explain complicated topics based on legitimate, valid, credible research in terms which are relatively simple, straightforward, and very, very contextualized. When we don't lose sight of the fact that everything needs to be relevant in a specific village, to a specific set of farmers, and we succeed in doing that, then what we're doing is a huge contribution to the overall value chain of climate change investigators.